love good music.
So do I. Let's get out of here.
Sit down.
Welcome to the Marx Brothers Council podcast. I am New York's own Noah Diamond, the man who found humor-esque and then lost it again before I had a chance to show it to anyone. But my desk is a mess here, but it'll turn up again. And I'm here today with three of the world's foremost wise guys. First, the exalted leader of the Marx Brothers Council, author, scholar, and raconteur, Mr. Matthew Coniam.
Yes, I'm all of those things. Hello. I'm speaking from England at 10 p.m. at night, and it's as hot as high noon. And in honor of our guest, I'm drinking Cabernet Sauvignon from my son's Minion mug.
Next, the inevitable and invaluable researcher and editor and misplaced Chicagoan and world-class kibitzer, Mr. Bob Gassell.
Hi. Can I speak now? Is Les done talking yet?
I think we're all a little less done talking. And now, finally, our very special guest for this episode, our friend and yours, Mr. Cinco Paul, a true Marx Brothers fan and an acclaimed screenwriter responsible for modern classics like Horton Hears a Who, The Lorax, The Secret Life of Pets, and the Despicable Me films, which, as you undoubtedly know, are sprinkled with Marxian references, as well as the stage musical Bubble Boy, based on his earlier film. Here he is, the one, the only,
Cinco!
That's me. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, like so many artists who have been inspired by the Marx Brothers, Cinco loves to make references to them in his work. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Cinco, your tributes to the Marx Brothers in your screenplays.
Yeah, sure. I think there was a moment when we were making Despicable Me 2 where it suddenly hit me that we were basically making a Marx Brothers movie. You know, that the comedy was the most important part. You know, the first movie, there was a lot of heart to it. There's a big emotional story. And then at some point I realized, oh yeah, the plot is just there so that we can have a lot of fun. So actually several of the reviews, and this made me really happy, you know, mentioned the Marx Brothers in the reviews of the movie, that it had sort of the spirit of that, which, you know, was like the greatest thing I could ever hear. But so when we made Despicable Me 3, I took the opportunity to lay in some references. We have Gru finds out he has a long lost brother who lives in a country called Fredonia. And so we go all the way to Fredonia and spend most of the movie there. And then there's the MacGuffin is this diamond which has been stolen, which I named the Dumont diamond in honor of Maggie. And originally there were Gru's brother had three little helpers that were his own, and I named them like Julie, Lenny, and Art. But they ultimately got cut. It was sort of like his version of the own Minions, but they got cut. I will say that the reason I got involved in movies and screenwriting in the first place has everything to do with that first Marx Brothers movie I saw when I was 10, because that led me to look for other Marx Brothers movies, and I would go to the library and I would read all about the Marx Brothers and Chaplin and Lloyd and Laurel and Hardy, and that created that love, and then my parents had a Super 8 camera, and so I started making my own movies, just stealing all the gags from everything I was seeing, and that, I think if I possibly hadn't seen The Big Store, you know, that Saturday morning when I was 10, I would never have ended up in the movie business.
Well, I think a lot of screenwriters looked at The Big Store and said, oh, I could do something better than that.
You know, I was 10, Bob. I was 10.
Well, Cinco, you've worked with some of the funniest people in the world, and I wonder if you ever had a moment with Steve Carell or Jim Carrey or Danny DeVito or anyone that was explicitly or otherwise a Marxian moment?
Yeah, you know what, Steve and I have talked several times about how there is a spirit of the Marx Brothers in the Despicable Me movies, particularly with the Minions and Harpo. He's definitely brought that up. I was always a huge fan of Siskel and Ebert, and a dream as a kid had been like, I want them to review one of my movies. And Gene passed away, but Roger was still reviewing when the Santa Claus 2 came out, by second movie. And he opened the review. It was a positive review, amazingly enough, but he opened the review by quoting Chico's Sanity Clause line from A Night at the Opera, which is just, my head basically exploded. It's Roger Ebert and the Marx Brothers and reviewing a movie of mine. So that was just a real happy moment for me.
Music and comedy are like siblings. They go together, and if you have skills in one of these areas, you can probably handle yourself in the other. Music and comedy both have a lot to do with timing and rhythm and tempo, repetition, and even melody. The rise and fall of a vocal line is just as important to the efficacy of a joke as to a song. But even considering this, the Marx Brothers were, of course, in a class by themselves as musical comedians. And that's what we're going to talk about this episode. Each of us has selected some favorite or most interesting musical moments from the Marx canon, and we're going to discuss them right now. Matthew, would you care to get us started?
Yes, well, I was thinking in general terms about their career as comedians who sing songs in films, and it occurred to me that might be a little more accidental than we think, and also that Kalmar and Ruby might have had much more of a specific influence on how that came about. When a stage comedian starts making films, it's always like beginning again, and I think if Paramount had seen Coconuts on stage and thought, these guys are great, let's get them over to Hollywood making screen originals, then I think we would have had something like Monkey Business straight away. And I think that would probably have set a precedent for the kind of films they made, maybe with the musical solos from Harpo and Chico, but probably not with song numbers. But of course that didn't happen. Obviously they stayed in New York and they made the films of their two Broadway musicals. But actually even there, if you look at them, the musical content is pared down, and particularly the Marx musical content. And so I wondered if at that point the idea that they were film comedians who sing songs might have trailed away and vanished if it weren't for the fact that Kalmar and Ruby were then hired for Horse Feathers. And the interesting coincidence about them, obviously, is that they are screenwriters and songwriters both. So I wonder if they may have been hired as screenwriters and then almost instinctively thought, well, we write songs for them, let's write some songs for them. And it's the most musical of all their movies in terms of the musical opportunities that the brothers themselves get. It's song-packed for them. And obviously that then kind of both shatters the precedent set by Monkey Business and establishes a new one, which continues through Duck Soup, which has also got comedy songs for them in it. Things then change when they moved to MGM. Kalmar and Ruby were hired again for A Night at the Opera. They worked on it briefly, and then for whatever reason went away, but they were commissioned to write songs as well as to write some script material. So it's interesting that when they did leave the project, nobody else was brought in to write songs, and one wonders if Thalberg maybe had an idea that the Marx Brothers shouldn't themselves be involved in singing. That's for Alan Jones and Kitty Carlisle to do. And obviously in the next film, Day at the Races, Groucho gets one of his most famous specialty numbers, Dr. Hackenbush, and that too disappears. Nobody's entirely sure when that happened, but somewhere in the 11th hour that gets jettisoned. So it's almost as if, like when they first came to Hollywood, Thalberg is yet again changing the rules. It's interesting that when songs come back in At the Circus with Lydia, and then Riding the Range and Go West and Sing While You Sell in The Big Store, it's slightly different in that Groucho's songs previously at Paramount, the songs in Animal Crackers and in Horse Feathers and in Duck Soup, address and advance the plot. They're absolutely in character. They're absolutely part of the scenes that they're contained within. Whereas the others at MGM, he just sings a song. He just comes on and he sings a song. So they're more like a little specialty turn for him to do along the lines of the harp and piano solos. So it is something very, very different, and it is almost like a reinvention again. So one wonders if it hadn't been for Kalmar and Ruby and Horse Feathers, if the whole notion of them being film comedians who sing songs might have been something that they left behind on the Broadway stage and never really became a feature of their screen work.
I always have found it interesting that Groucho had no songs in the film version of Coconuts. Did he have anything that was cut that was originally in the play?
He did. His big number in Coconuts is called "Why Am I a Hit with the Ladies?" Mm-hmm. And the lyrics are available in the published lyrics of Irving Berlin, and I believe Mark Bedard, in his recent adaptation of Coconuts, reinstated that number. But yeah, it does seem as though the Marx Brothers as singers were underused even in the Broadway years. I mean, in I'll Say She Is, as it was originally presented, they don't seem to have sung at all. I completely agree with your point, Matthew, that Kalmar and Ruby's involvement in the last two Paramounts probably is why Horse Feathers and Duck Soup feel like a return to Animal Crackers in many ways, and Monkey Business feels like an anomaly. Let us move on then to our next musical moment. What do you got, Cinco?
Well, I was. It's right on the topic of Groucho and Kalmar and Ruby, and I think my favorite Groucho musical moment is actually "Just Wait Till I Get Through with It" from Duck Soup. Mm-hmm. To me, this one is the sharpest, the funniest. It's kind of the darkest, with sort of the openly admitting to corruption and firing squads and all those sort of things. It's also interesting, Kalmar and Ruby have a definite structure for Groucho's songs. They're almost two songs hooked to each other.
Yes.
In Horse Feathers, it's I'm against it, then I always get my man. And Animal Crackers, Hello, I Must Be Going, and then Hooray for Captain Spaulding. It's a very interesting choice.
Very true.
That they make, which you just don't see that often outside of these movies. But I'm going to make a case for Just Wait Till I Get Through with It as the ultimate Groucho song.
For our information, just for illustration, tell us how you intend to run the nation.
These are the laws of my administration. No one's allowed to smoke or tell a dirty joke, and whistling is forbidden. We're not allowed to tell a dirty joke. If chewing gum is chewed, the chewer is pursued, and in the hoosegow hidden. If we choose to chew, we'll be pursued. If any form of pleasure is exhibited, report to me and it will be prohibited. I'll put my foot down, so shall it be. This is the land of the free. The last man nearly ruined this place. He didn't know what to do with it. If you think this country's bad off now, just wait till I get through with it. The country's taxes must be fixed, and I know what to do with it. If you think you're paying too much now, just wait till I get through with it. I will not stand for anything that's crooked or unfair. I'm strictly on the up and up, so everyone beware. If anyone's caught taking graft, and I don't get my share, we stand 'em up against the wall and pop goes the weasel. So everyone beware, crooked or unfair. No mistake of this is graft, if any man should come between a husband and his bride, we find out which one she prefers by letting her decide. If she prefers the other man, the husband steps outside. We stand him up against the wall and pop goes the weasel.
It seems to me maybe one of the many things about the Kalmar and Ruby Groucho material that is kind of inherited from Gilbert and Sullivan. A lot of numbers with two different refrains or songs that evolve as they're going into other songs. I think they were pretty conscious of emulating Gilbert and Sullivan for Groucho, and sometimes it reminds me of that more than anything.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like Horse Feathers is maybe the most joyful of the songs, with all the beard pulling and the dancing, and that's super fun. But I love the sharpness of this, of Wait Till I Get Through With It. And I know Matthew has issues with Duck Soup, so...
Yeah, no. With Duck Soup, it's more with the comedy content. The part of Duck Soup that I have no problem with whatsoever is the Colmo and Ruby stuff. So all the bits that are like the previous movies, I love. It's just the kind of the new stuff. So the songs, or at least that song, I think is right up there with the best ones. I'm not too keen on Freonia's Going to War, not so much for the song itself as for the ridiculous way it's staged. I can't stand seeing those extras holding poses and Chico pulling silly faces, and I just think they've been let go too much there, and I just don't enjoy that at all. But it's the staging rather than the song itself.
I find it interesting that Matthew likes Sing While You Sell, because to me that's kind of the anti-Groucho song for me. I have a lot of trouble with that song because where there's a lot of bite and satire and fun in Just Wait Till I Get Through With It. I mean, he's like encouraging his employees to sing while they sell. It just doesn't feel like Groucho at all to me. It's that soft Groucho that I think we all dislike.
I guess it is strange that he's exhorting them to greater productivity, but at least he's not saying, work extra hours or do your tie up, stand up straight. It's much more, the idea of singing, the idea, you'll sell no pan without Chopin. It's a million miles from prime Groucho, of course, but it is at least silly. It is at least, there's kind of a zaniness to it, and I just enjoy it. I just find it. I always did from the first time I saw it. I thought this film has lifted here. It seems sort of a piece with Lydia to me. Certainly not with the Paramount songs, but I wouldn't put it a billion miles behind Lydia. The thing that's much better with Lydia, obviously, is that some of that writing is so sublime. Eyes That Focus Also, and A Torso even more so. That's lovely stuff, and there's nothing like that in Sing While You Sell. But I love the effervescence of it. I love the bounce and the swing. I really do.
Yeah, as a piece of songwriting, I don't think it's terrible, but I don't really like the idea of Groucho's powers being put in service of this department store boosterism. It doesn't really seem worthy of him. Isn't it interesting that the songs in Duck Soup and Horse Feathers, there's only one performance on record, with all the other signature material, Captain Spaulding and Lydia. We have other examples of him singing those songs on many occasions. Mm-hmm. But I'm against it, which in some ways could be the ultimate Grouchovian statement. It's just that one time. As far as we know, he never sang it again.
That's interesting. Well, I think part of it is probably because they were one-shot songs. Obviously the songs from Animal Crackers he'd have done over and over and over again. He probably learned that song, recorded it, shot it, and then was done with it.
Matthew, you have, I believe, chosen a Chico moment to discuss next.
Yes, it's a bit of a cheat, really, because it's not really for the number itself, although it is delightful. It's his piano solo from Animal Crackers. And the reason for that is I've been absolutely fascinated for years by what he says before it.
I tell you what I do. I play you one of my own compositions by Victor Herman.
For all the years that I loved the Marx Brothers before I encountered anyone else who did, I always thought it was Victor Herman, the director of the film. His name is spelt Herman, but it was pronounced Herman, and I just assumed it was an in-joke. I mean, the joke obviously is, here's one of my own compositions by somebody else. So the name, to some extent, it doesn't matter. It's still the same joke, and I just assumed it was Victor Herman. Then when I got talking to other people, they said, oh, no, it's Victor Herbert. And I said, oh, right, why'd you say that? And they said, well, because he's a composer, so it makes more sense. But really, it doesn't make more sense, because the piece he plays is Silver Threads Among the Gold, which is by H.P. Danks and Eben E. Rexford, and it's not by Victor Herbert. So in a way, it's kind of clouding the joke to say a real composer who isn't the composer. So that was always my position, and I stuck to it rigidly. Then when I was researching the annotated Marx Brothers, I got hold of the book of Kaufman scripts, Kaufman and Co. And there it is in black and white, Victor Herbert. So I changed that in my book. My book says Victor Herbert. Since then, I've changed my mind again, and I've changed my mind again for this reason. The original play script of Animal Crackers, he goes on to play Gypsy Love Song, which is by Victor Herbert. So it makes perfect sense. He doesn't do that in the film, and the reason he doesn't do that in the film is because he'd already done that in the film of the Coconuts. Now, it's easy to see why he did that. Obviously, you know, Chico is somebody who likes to put as little effort into what he does as possible, and they were shooting Coconuts while they were playing the stage version of Animal Crackers. So he thought, well, you know, why bother perfecting some other tune? I may as well do the one that I'm doing on stage every night. So he sneaks Gypsy Love Song into Coconuts, the film. So when we get to the Animal Crackers film, he's not able to do that anymore. So he changes the song, and the song becomes Silver Threads Among the Gold. Now, all he has to do is change that lead in line. Now, it seems to me very, very unlikely that he would choose to just stick with Herbert. You could perhaps make a case that he was doing a kind of a Yeats to Polly thing, and it just slipped his mind. And you could maybe make that case, but I can't see any real case for him sticking with that deliberately. So I think he's got two options. He can either rewrite the joke in the same way and say, here's one of my own compositions by H.P. Danks and Eben E. Rexford, but obviously that sounds rubbish. It's the same joke, but the rhythm is not funny anymore. Or he can say something else, and I just have a feeling that he decided to say something else, and that he hit on saying Victor Herman instead of Victor Herbert in that in-jokey way that they were quite fond of. I mean, it seems to me very much like in Monkey Business, the Margaret Dumont-esque opera singer in the script is called Madame Swempsky. In the film, on the soundtrack, there's no question that she's called Madame Frenchy. So that's obviously something that they just decided to do on a whim, probably on the day that Frenchy was on the set doing that little walk on. So that that was the kind of thing they did, and I just have a feeling that he decided to change that line as an in-joke to Victor Herman. And I do hear an M sound in there, and I've said this to other people, and they've had a listen, and they've said, yeah, there is an M in there. So I've changed my mind, and the second edition, it will go back to being Victor Herman for that reason.
I'd have to listen to it again to see, because I've never heard Herman. I've obviously only heard Victor Herbert. It's a better joke because people know Victor Herbert, and they don't know whoever those guys were who wrote Silver Threads Among the Gold.
I tell you what I do. I play you one of my own compositions by Victor Herbert. Make it short.
Yeah, like you, Cinco, I've always heard it as Victor Herbert, and that seemed like a perfectly solid joke, and it never occurred to me that it was anything else until I heard Matthew's theory. And now I just don't know what to believe.
Wait till you hear what he says about the Kennedy assassination.
It was Victor Herbert, right? Bob, would you like to sing While You Gazelle?
Geez. My favorite performance in a Marx film. It's not out of the box. It's not a surprise. It's Chico's Everyone Says I Love You, sang the Thelma Todd in Horse Feathers. Yes. It's just so wonderful and charming the way they look at each other. They have real chemistry, and I have no doubt that there was something going on there between the takes. It's just a shame that Chico had this great bit singing with his accent and his mispronunciations and everything, and this was the only time they really did a full-fledged song. I wish this would have been a regular thing in their repertoire. Let's take a listen.
Everyone says I love you. The great big mosquito when he stings you. The fly when he gets stuck on the fly paper too says I love you. Every time the cow says moo, she's a making the bull feel very happy too. And the rooster when he holler cock-a-doodly-doodly-doo says I love you. Christopher Colombo, he write the Queen of Spain a very nice little note. And he's right all over you, baby, and then he get himself a great big boat. He's a wiser guy, what do you think Colombo do? When he's come here in 1492, he say to Pocahontas, atcha-fatcha-dutcha-goo. That means, you little son of a gun, I love you.
Every time I hear that, I think about the missed opportunities. There were other songs in the Marx repertoire in their films that I think he would have been great singing. I would have loved to have heard him do Cosi Cosa. I would have loved to have heard him do Lydia. I think he would have had a nice take on it that maybe even Groucho didn't have. But maybe on the other hand, it's just as well that we can get to hear him sing in The Big Store. God knows what MGM would have had him do there.
It's a wonderful bit. I mean, and I think other than a little tiny amount at the very end of Day at the Races, the only solo singing we ever get to hear from Chico in the films. And not only that, but the only time that a lyricist working with the Marx Brothers rose to the challenge of writing lyrics for Chico's character and dialect. But it's wonderful what they did, and it makes me wish Chico had had more specialty vocals. It's great when, they actually must have written it down, Christopher Colombo, he write the Queen of Spain a very nice a little note, and he's a say I love a you maybe, and
he's
so
a wise guy.
A great big vote. He's a wise guy.
He's a wise guy.
It's just great stuff, and it makes me think Chico had great unexplored potential as a singing comedian.
He probably did a lot of stuff like that in his nightclub act, I would assume.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is a lovely moment. I mean, the surprising thing, I think, is that it doesn't strike us as so incredibly unusual. Everyone loves it. It's an absolutely delightful sequence, but people don't tend to think, and Chico actually has a song in this one. It's really, but it is the one and only time, as you say, a few little bits here and there. He also gets one sung feed line, doesn't he, in Riding the Range. He gets My Father Shot at the Indians in 1862 or whatever it was. But not much. I mean, even in Fredonia's Going to War, Groucho gets a solo bit in that. Zeppo gets a line in that. Chico doesn't. So it is very, very strange, given just how good at it he is, how delightful he is. And it's interesting that in the BBC Flywheel, Shyster and Flywheels that Mark Brissenden adapted, in order to pad them out to half-hour length, Chico got a number every week.
Yes.
And it just reinforces what a little asset they had there that they frustratingly used just that one time.
The saxophone and piano trio in Monkey Business, which seems to pop up out of nowhere as they're in the middle of being pursued across the deck of the ship. Suddenly Chico lands at the piano and the other three brothers with saxophones and skimmer or boater hats, as in the Chevalier sequence. That's a great moment of not just seemingly impromptu musical performance from all four brothers, but the brothers as this unified force using music as an instrument of rebellion.
Cinco, I seem to recall you mentioning once that you didn't think it was them actually playing.
Yeah, I can't imagine it was. Were they all reasonably adept at the saxophone? I mean, it's very hard to just pick up a saxophone and make anything come out of it. So that would be my guess, that it wasn't them. But I love that moment too. That's what I mean. I love the opening of Monkey Business as well in so many ways, because it's, we get very few moments with all four brothers, working together in that way. That's why I have a fondness for The Country's Going to War too, because I liked seeing all four of them together. But I really love that moment.
It never occurred to me that it wasn't them playing, but you make a interesting and valid point, and certainly it sounds as though the applause which follows that performance is dubbed in after the fact.
Oh, absolutely,
so
yeah.
There's no reason to think the music wasn't also, but it is a little sloppy. I mean, I know that it's certainly true that even being able to fake it badly on the saxophone takes some skill, and Harpo's the only Marx brother who I know could play reed instruments.
Right, yeah. He plays the clarinet and coconuts.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And also on some of those later TV appearances, I'm forever blowing bubbles, with bubbles coming out of the clarinet and things like that. But I don't know, because that saxophone trio it's highly imperfect, They don't necessarily sound in tune with each other.
I would think that they would try and find some instrument that they could at least get a sound out of for them to pick up and play.
Yeah.
I may be making a fool of myself here, but didn't Zeppo play the sax? I thought he did.
He definitely shopped at sax.
Off screen, he was the best saxophone player. That's what I heard. It is an interesting point to me, though, that and maybe it's not interesting to anybody else, but whether like the musical numbers like Chico's, and I say Chico, and I'm sorry, I'm stuck with it. But whether and Harpo's were actually filmed and recorded live, or whether they recorded it earlier and then played to it. Specifically in the Chico Harpo duet in The Big Store, if you're paying attention, Harpo is not playing that part, the bottom part of that duet at all. So
I've heard a great deal of conflicting information. I haven't made an intensive study of this, but Monkey Business, despite its lack of songs, does have a lot of musical moments in it. The saxophone trio, the Chevalier bit, and also possibly Harpo's funniest harp solo. There's some great gags at the top of his solo in Monkey Business.
Yeah, I'm going to say my actual favorite musical moments from both Chico and Harpo are in Monkey Business. I love the Harpo because, he's making fun of the opera singer. It's a little hint of what was to come, I think, in Night at the Opera.
Yeah, Monkey Business is it does feel like so much of Monkey Business became this font of inspiration for all the films later. You have the Day at the Races moment where Groucho becomes a doctor and asks where the horse is. And some real Night at the Opera type stuff too in the party scene. And also Madame Frenchie is an opera celebrity, isn't she?
Yeah, and I was actually going to say my favorite Chico. Sorry, is it offensive to you every time I say Chico?
No, it's fine. We talked about it in the first episode.
Yeah, I remember you discussing it. I can't remember where everybody landed, but anyway, I love the solo in Monkey Business, and it just fits the classic Chico format, which is he starts with a classical sounding piece. And then at some point, he gets this wicked grin on his face as he switches to a more popular song. In this case, it's pizzicato. It's that da 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 da, which to me is is perfectly designed for his shooting the keys technique. And
absolutely.
And I'm actually Chico's piano playing was a huge part of my attraction to the Marx Brothers early on because I play piano, and I, immediately tried to learn this solo, the Monkey Business one, and shredded my middle finger. I don't know if anyone else has tried to do that glissando technique, but he must have had crazy tough fingers. I mean, you look at him, and they're not necessarily the fingers of a pianist. They're more the fingers of a working man. They're a little sort of thicker and tougher. But anyway, I love this, and then he switches to When I Take My Sugar to Tea, which I always assumed was Ain't She Sweet, because it's sort of the same chord structure. But I don't know, that's always been a favorite of mine, that solo.
So when you were practicing Cinco and trying to master the Chico technique, the key question is, did you soak your hands in water first?
Yeah, I did not. Maybe that's the key. Yeah, and I have a hard time, as someone who plays piano, buying that was what he did to practice. Just soak his hands in hot water for 20 minutes or something. That's enough practice. Yeah. That's the legend.
I wonder if he just, over the course of his entire adult life, played the piano so often and so vigorously that he was never out of practice.
Yeah. Do we know where he learned that shooting technique? Was that totally from him? Did he observe someone else doing it and imitate it? Do we know?
That's a really good question. I would imagine he did not learn it from the piano teacher Minnie hired.
No. That's where he learned all the classical pieces that he played at the beginning of the solos. Yeah.
It seems like something that would have been what could I do that's on stage that the audience would appreciate?
Yeah, right. A piano fingering technique that you could see from the balcony.
I just remember as a 10-year-old kid, when I saw my first Marx Brothers movie, just being totally delighted and obsessed with his piano technique and trying to figure it out. Yeah, I would order the music. I would, tape it from the TV and listen to it to try to, figure it out in my own version.
Now, all Chico's stuff appears to be live. It's hard to fake a piano solo with the camera so close in on the keys.
Yeah, I mean, there are some cuts in there, right?
I'm sure they did some inserts.
There are some inserts, but I've looked at them pretty closely, and they seem, it's only the duet in The Big Store that seems flagrantly Harpo is making almost no attempt. He's just sort of slapping his hands on the piano, and I think he could play piano. I think they've done it live together, but I think maybe he was just what's the point of putting in effort? It's pre-recorded.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think certainly in the very early Paramount films, I think it seems to be live. But definitely by the time you get to MGM, I suspect that they are miming to a track. And we've certainly come across slightly ambiguous references to other people who are actually playing on the record, and that seems like sacrilege, like, you know, a heresy. But if you look at it from Harpo's point of view, you know, he making these movies isn't really a particularly important thing to him, and I think he might have thought, well, you know, if I'm on there, you can see me, and I'm the star. Why really does it matter if it's actually me playing it on the tape? You know, if I have to come all the way into the studio and record this, you know, who is that benefiting really? I think if you look at it in that sort of a way, it's not so shocking and it's not so outrageous. You know, he's only making a movie. It's when he's live on stage is when he wants to really impress people. If he's just shooting a scene in a film, yeah, why not just mime to something that somebody else has recorded?
Well, you know, it is true with regard to all these questions of overdubs that in general, live music is imperfect, and whether it's in a theater or in a nightclub or a concert, you can always tolerate imperfections and even flubs and mistakes in live music that just sticks out like a sore thumb in recorded music or on film. And I think it's entirely possible that in their stage career, Harpo and Chico, hit some clinkers, as Les Marsden put it in our interview with him. But on film, yeah, as Matthew says, being a little more fastidious about no false moments or instances of inconsistent timing, it does make sense. And if you could bring in somebody who was just a more polished sort of machine, I could easily imagine Harpo wanting that.
It's so fun to find this stuff out, and it's really interesting, but then there's part of it that is a little breaks my heart to think that all this time I thought that was Harpo playing and that might be somebody else. But is there, what sort of evidence is there?
It's like finding out that somebody else did Groucho's autograph.
Yes, exactly. I want to cling to the fantasy. Yeah. That is Groucho's signature on that 8x10 I've got hanging on my wall, you know. And Harpo did play it.
We found a few little hints and suggestions in the papers that it was that other people claimed, you know, took credit for doing it. I've also heard that some of the close-ups of the hands are not his hands. I can't remember who told me that. I think it might have been George Bettinger, but it doesn't particularly shock or surprise me really. It doesn't detract from anything that's good about them.
Speaking of which, maybe we should get in. Maybe we've gone into this before, and we'll get into it again about Zeppo's singing performance in Horse Feathers. There seems to be a lot of debate about whether it's actually him singing. For a long time, everybody assumed it was, and there has been some dispute that's come up recently.
Is it because it sounds too good to be Zeppo? I guess that's really what it comes down to.
I was always pretty convinced. I mean, in Horse Feathers, when he sings Everyone Says I Love You, it always seemed to me like very natural and seemed and sounded a lot like him. But on the other hand, it is true that in other occasions outside of Horse Feathers, he often seems very oddly resistant to singing, including in Animal Crackers, his part in Captain Spaulding, which is fairly substantial, which he just chants.
I represent the captain who insists on my informing you of these conditions under which he canvass here. In one thing he is very strict. He wants his women young and fit, and as for men, he won't have any tramps here.
And, you know, there are notes to that stuff. And when you see Animal Crackers on stage in Revival, generally people playing Jamison sing those notes. And then his How I Should Cry for Firefly line in Duck Soup is also kind of, you know, spoken or chanted rather than sung.
Oh, how we cry for Firefly if Firefly should die.
So that suggests perhaps he was a non-singer.
What makes this all the more strange is that at this exact moment, somebody is trying to forge a singing career for Zeppo. There's talk of him going on the radio and perhaps making a record, and there's articles that he's going to be featured singing and maybe even writing a song for the upcoming Marx film. So someone somewhere is trying to pass him off as a legitimate singer.
Maybe those were planted to sell us on the fact that was his voice in the horse feathers. Did any of that come to fruition? Is there a Zeppo Sings album?
There really isn't. It's hard to find any recording from back then of Zeppo. There's no radio performance with him. There's really nothing of him off screen.
His Chevalier impression is very convincing as far as it being his real voice, not sounding like Chevalier, but in both the House That Shadows Built theatrical agency sketch and in Monkey Business. If I had to guess, I would say it's really Zeppo singing in every instance, but I don't know.
You know, what might throw people is that it is dubbed in. You know, it obviously, he wasn't singing live there. Even if it is his voice, it was a dubbed in recording.
Yeah, the thing with him on the radio show that we found, I mean, whatever the truth of that is, it was saying that show actually happened, wasn't it? If I remember rightly, it was saying that he actually did do that show where he was singing. So it's possible. I mean, unless John Tefteller has got another big surprise waiting for us, and I know he's got at least one very big surprise waiting for us. But unless he's got that under his belt as well, obviously that show is lost. But the implication was that it did happen. I mean, my reason, which is a very naive reason for thinking that he is singing "Everyone Says I Love You," is that it sounds like him to me, and that is a really silly layman's reason for thinking it. But I just think I can hear his voice there. I think I can hear his speaking voice singing. Mm-hmm. It is dubbed, yes, and obviously he is. If it is him, he is putting a lot of effort in because he's being a crooner in a way that he wasn't before. And it's possible that he's thinking, this film career isn't working for me. Maybe I'll give this a try. He certainly tried plenty of other things. He wrote screenplays and things. Maybe he was giving that a try. My only reason for doubting it now is that his most sort of steadfast defender, who's our friend Andrea Orlando, who we must get on here at some point to talk about this, who was really manning the barricades against any suggestion that it wasn't him, has lately decided that maybe it isn't, and she has sort of reasons for thinking that are way beyond my comprehension about his tonal range or something, and she is now starting to doubt it. So I really must sit on the fence here. But to me, it just sounds like his voice.
I feel that way too. It's just convinces me that it is him.
Yeah, I think that, the part that sticks out to me is that when Dad gets mad.
Oh, yes.
And that sticks out a little bit of sore thumb, but I think it could be Zeppo, like, imitating a pop singer of the day or something like that. It doesn't necessarily sound like him, but I could see him, well, this is how I should try to make it sound, because that sticks out a little bit to me.
Knowing Dad as I do, I'd not advise you to displease him or tease him. No, don't double-cross him or toss him around. When dear old Dad once gets mad, he's a hound.
Well, would you mind if I talked a little bit about some Groucho signature numbers that weren't in the films, but that became so heavily associated with him later in his career on the Evening with Groucho record and elsewhere? And so many of those are so distinctively his, but they're not really canonical in the sense of being from the films. Mm-hmm. Kalmar and Ruby extras like Show Me a Rose and Father's Day. And there's a place called Omaha, Nebraska, which I think is Groucho's only songwriting credit. He wrote that with Harry Ruby. And all three of these songs are so interesting to me. They're sort of more droll than laugh out loud funny, and they're just kind of 1 degree removed from the kind of sentimental, straightforward ballads that they seem to be parodying. And, especially Show Me a Rose and Omaha, Nebraska, you could change a lyric, just a word here and there, and turn them into very straightforward, sort of unremarkable period sentimental ballads, but partly because of Groucho's delivery and partly because the lyrics are just skewed ever so slightly toward absurdity, they become these sort of droll relics of the mangy lover period.
And we can't forget Go West, Young Man.
Yeah, Go West, Young Man. I guess you could put Dr. Hackenbush in this column, too.
Stay Down Where You Belong. I love that one. That's Berlin, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's an early one. That's the other dimension, I guess, of non-filmic Groucho numbers. The really early stuff that he kept going in later in his career, like stuff like Timbuktu, which is by Kalmar and Ruby, and Oh How That Woman Could Cook, and Everybody Works But Father.
Right.
He turned those things into maybe funnier pieces than they really were.
And what's that tune from Skidoo that was cut?
I don't know. I think it was by Victor Herman.
Did he have a cut number from Skidoo?
No, I'm joking.
But it is interesting. The three earlier songs that you mentioned are all parodies, right? They're all parodies of a certain type of song, and I'd say like Omaha, Nebraska is flat out nonsense. There's not very subtle lyrical changes there. That's just, but it is interesting. It makes me think about when parodies of pop music began, and where that came from, and if Groucho was sort of at the beginning of that sort of thing.
Yeah, it does strike me as another vaudevillian convention,
Right.
Just changing the lyrics to well-known songs. It's all kind of been an age-old source of amusement, and I'm sure it happened all the time in vaudeville. It's true, Omaha, Nebraska. It vaguely seems like it's riffing on songs like Swanee,
Right. Yeah.
Tributes to places, sentimental places, and it mixes up all the geography a lot, of course, but it's not the all-out assault on a song form that one might expect if you're imagining a Groucho Marx popular song parody. And Father's Day manages to be sort of genuinely moving, even though it is tongue-in-cheek and has its kind of snide, according to our mother, you're our father, and that's good enough for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yet, I've performed it on Father's Day, and people are moved by it. It is genuinely sweet.
It is, especially, that's good enough for us. It's sort of a joke, but then it also is like, that's how we feel about our dads. That's good.
Yeah.
We love you no matter what, Dad. Even if you aren't really our dad, we love you.
So do we know the exact deal with Duck Soup and why there's no piano solo or harp solo in the film? If you look back at the time, those parts were always considered the highlights of their performances, live and in film. Everybody always raved about the solos. It's not like people were getting tired of them. So it's just, what do you think? Did the fact that they were not in the film harm the film?
I do think it sort of harms the film because I enjoy them so much. I mean, I agree completely with Cinco. The first time I saw the Marx Brothers, one of the things I enjoyed most was seeing Chico play the piano. I thought that was absolutely wonderful and funny. I thought it was as much a part of the fun, as much a part of the comedy as anything else in the movie. So I do really miss it. What I don't know is why that decision was taken exactly, or if it was something that I can blame McCary for. I mean, obviously that is my default. If in doubt, blame McCary. I presume it was a decision from emanating from around him that we were going to cut all this stuff out this time. Obviously, it must have been a late decision. I don't think those sequences have actually been cut from the film itself, but they've clearly been cut from the screenplay because there are obvious moments in the movie where they would have happened. There's no sharp cut there where it's been taken out, but you can see where it was about to happen. So it was obviously a fairly late decision. Yeah, I do miss it. I do regret it. It is something that I hold against Duck Soup for that reason. I think it was a decision that was wrong.
I definitely feel the same way. I love Duck Soup, but I think you miss it. You feel it. It makes me a little sad that it's not there. And Matthew, I'm wondering, is it in the break-in in the house? Is that where you're thinking that? Because there is the little, strumming of the keyboard strings, of the piano strings there. Is that where you're thinking they would go, or?
Yes, that was always my presumption, was that when they're there with those instruments, that's when it would have happened, and that would have been nice, because obviously they're supposed to be quiet and they're not, and they're obviously not being quiet. So it is the absolutely wrong place for them to go.
I would put the blame on McCary, right? He's the X factor there.
Yeah, I would think so, and I certainly agree that I'd rather have those solos in, and not just for their own delightful qualities, which are abundant, but because I think it's a crucial part of the Marx Brothers act that every now and then you're going to get an out of context, standalone performance. Very much the way variety performers of the stage would just interpolate their specialties.
I was listening the other day to our comrades over at the Full Marx podcast. Who I'm giving them a plug, because if you can't wait a month to listen to us, there's another Marx podcast that I really like. It's called the Full Marx podcast, and they're going through all the films. And they were going through Duck Soup just the other day, and this topic came up, and one of the gentlemen said that it was at Groucho's insistence that the solos were dropped. I'm not really sure what the source is, but that doesn't sound totally out of line.
I was going to ask about that because, it's fairly well known that he was not fond of them, and that is one of his greatest lines in Horse Feathers.
Yeah.
But to the point of removing his own brother's musical moments from the movie, that seems a little harsh.
Yeah, it is some of the rare documented occasions of Marx Brothers being ungenerous with each other do happen when Groucho in later interviews discusses the solos of his brothers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never sure, to be honest, how true these stories are, but I'm perfectly prepared to believe that Groucho wasn't so keen on those moments. I don't think that necessarily means that he would have had clout with the studio above and beyond what Harpo and Chico would have done in order to get them removed. I can't really see Groucho going to either the director or somebody at Paramount and saying, I want my brother's solos out of the next movie. They would say, no, people like them, don't be so silly. I just can't imagine Groucho individually having that kind of power where it counts. Yes, the other thing, of course, that's missing from Duck Soup is the whole Big Bad Wolf sequence, which apparently was shot after principal photography had completed. They were called back to shoot an entirely separate sequence, the details of which are extremely vague, but which involved the Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf song, which was like a huge big deal at that time, very briefly, from its appearance in the Disney cartoon. Apparently they shelled out big bucks for it, and shot this sequence in which Groucho was in some way representing the wolf. God knows how it would have fitted in or where it would have fitted in, but in any event, they did apparently shoot it and then abandon it. And all that they did with the song, which they paid out for, is just have that tiny little extract from it that's on the thing that Harpo picks up, and that's all that's left of it. But even after it's released, the reviews, which are presumably based largely on press releases, still make this big deal about it, how it's got this song, the new American national anthem or something, that it plays a big part in this film, which it obviously doesn't. It's a very strange and perplexing mystery. As we know, there are some stills, a selection of stills that aren't from any scene that's surviving in the film, where Groucho is in that reception set from his first appearance, and there are loads of women about in kind of fluffy white dresses with what looks like crooks, so they look like shepherdesses. It's just possible that is a remnant of this scene, but it is a strange mystery of Duck Soup that what appears to be a large production number was shot after principal photography, and then was junked. And the only reason I can presume it was junked is because it must have been rubbish. I can't think of any other reason why they would have bothered to do that and then not kept it in.
As someone who's worked in the movie biz, it does sound like classic, like studio executive idea of hey, this song is a huge hit. This will really help our movie to somehow shoehorn this into the Marx Brothers film. And it seems like that classic idea. Somebody up high must have thought that would be great, and so they did it, and then they realized, like Matthew said, it didn't fit. It didn't work. I would love to see it, though.
Thinking about the moment in Duck Soup when Harpo plucks the piano strings and the only even whisper of an instrumental solo in that film, what do you guys make of the Day at the Races harp solo in which he extracts the strings from a grand piano and plays that stringboard as though it were a harp? How legitimate do you think that is? You think he really is playing piano strings that have been extracted, and how viable is that?
That's interesting. I wish I knew how a harp was strung, because is it strung chromatically in that way? I don't think a harp is strung chromatically like a piano. So my guess would be no way. Although I love his destruction of the piano.
Yeah,
with the song and then the revelation. It's really clever, but I can't imagine he's actually playing the strings from the piano. But I would be happy to be corrected by someone who knows better than I.
We should have Les Marsden or Seth Sheldon on to talk harp mechanics. I have been talked through some of the details of how a harp works by both of those gentlemen, but I can't intelligently convey it to you. But yeah, it always seemed a little too good to be true, this act of wanton destruction of the piano resulting in this typically heavenly harp solo.
Yeah, it's a beautiful metaphor for sort of, or the two sides of Harpo Marx, that impish destruction, just like when he's burning books and destroying the piano, but then there's like the soul of a poet inside him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the real value of the harp solos, isn't it? And Matthew points out in our chat, the loom that he plays in Go West is a similar kind of alternate harp for Harpo to play. But, it's interesting. We seem to all have immediately identified when we were children the Chico piano solos as just delightfully entertaining and one of the things that drew us into loving the films. Were the Harpo harp solos more of an acquired taste for you guys?
For me, I really loved the first movie I saw when I was 10 was The Big Store, and obviously later on I realized I was kind of a low
condolences,
a low point, a low point for them. And in particular, I know Noah's not going to enjoy it. I remember laughing hysterically at that roller skating chase at the end. I was 10. I didn't know any better, but I loved everything.
You didn't know it wasn't funny, no.
Yeah, but Noah hadn't explained to me how unfunny it was yet. Just like Matthew hadn't ruined Duck Soup for me yet, But I remember seeing, he's in the room with all the mirrors and he's got the old-fashioned garb on, and I remember just being really fascinated by what is this? It is fascinating. It was just really interesting to me, and I have to confess, later on, I was not, as a kid of 11 and 12, I'm not super captivated by all the harp solos, to be honest. But that did stick with me, that memory of who is this guy who was so crazy, and now he's making beautiful music, especially someone who, I've been playing classical music since I was little. It was really interesting to me.
The one that stuck with me when I was a kid was from At the Circus, the Blue Moon, and there's this lady looking through the harp, wide-eyed look right through the harp, watching him play, and the look of that lady is always freaked me out.
He's often serenading someone, right? Thelma Todd, the horse, the poster,
a group of children. And it also, we say it all the time, but it really is so true. And since we're all such tut critics, we should reiterate as often as possible that the worst Marx Brothers movie ever, whichever one you think it is still pretty delightful. And Cinco, I don't hold it against you that you you thought that roller skating stuff was funny when you were 10.
You know what's interesting to me, and please, Bob, feel free to cut this out if it's stupid, but Harpo rolled his sleeves up to play the harp, and it revealed his hairy arms, and somehow that seemed bizarre to me because he seemed like such a child, and it's wait, he has hairy arms? It was always incongruous to me.
You know, it's always also interesting in a few films, right when he's starting his harp solo, he like looks up in the sky at the heavens right before he starts.
Yeah.
You know, I've gone back and forth on that. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that's corny. And other times like, oh, look at him.
Yeah. Maybe he's playing to Minnie or something like that. Maybe that's a little moment for Mom.
Harpo and Chico often, I mean, they're presented as classical musicians a lot of the time, and sometimes they are, but they seem to have a distinctly working class approach to performing their solos, and rolling up the sleeves is maybe part of that. Also in Monkey Business, the way at the beginning of his solo, Chico says to the band, "Ready, boys? Let's go." And at the end of his solo, Harpo sort of poses like a prize fighter, like he just knocked someone out.
Yes.
You know? They do this in what in some ways are very refined displays of talent, but they are constantly undercutting the highfalutenness of it.
Yeah, I think there is an unresolved tension actually in the movies between their need to be presented as forces of nature, in other words, as essentially working class or indeed no class characters, and the fact that their musical dexterity is something that is associated with high culture. And I think sometimes the films try too hard really to kind of have it both ways. I mean, right from in Monkey Business, there's whatever her name is doing a solo in this room, so you all get in that room, and the whole plot, obviously, of A Night at the Opera is based on that sort of undefined schism. I mean, you read obviously constantly that one of the reasons why A Night at the Opera is so great is because it's anti-opera, and of course it isn't, because they love whatever he's called, Ricardo, they think he's just great. The only reason they don't like L'Aspare is because he's horrible, not because he's an opera singer. And again, and also Jardinay being sent off across the sea in that glorious end shot of At the Circus, which I think, ironically, for such a lackluster film, is probably the best ending of any of their movies. I love watching that bandstand disappear into the distance. I think they're constantly trying, and sometimes trying too hard, to make that distinction between what they do and what they're ostensibly doing, which is playing beautiful music beautifully.
Of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the wonderful serenading of Thelma Todd by Groucho in the canoe playing the guitar. Well, Groucho's playing the guitar, not the canoe. But, you know what I mean? In Horse Feathers, it's just wonderful that, and once again, like we talked about with Chico, this was something they didn't really explore. That there was a one-time thing, and it's a shame because it really is nice to look at. And with the right material, this could have been a nice regular bit in the Marx films, or at least more than a one-time thing.
Just what they say it for, I never knew. It's just inviting trouble for the poor sucker who says I love you. Take a pair of rabbits who get stuck on each other and begin to woo, and pretty soon you'll find a million more rabbits who say I love you. When the lion gets feeling frisky and begins to roar, there's another lion who knows just what he's roaring for. Everything that ever grew, the goose and the gander and the gosling too, the duck upon the water, when he feels that way too, says, "Wow, wow, wow." That's a wise quack.
Yeah, we get a tiny bit of guitar in Thelma Todd's stateroom in Monkey Business, and I guess Riding the Range is the only other example. It is true, Groucho had this, considerable ability to play the guitar. And it wasn't that he swore off doing it in character or on film altogether, but he did refuse to make it a real part of his character the way Harpo and Chico did with their instruments.
I guess because he was getting the big tunes early in the film, he didn't feel the need for things later on.
Yeah.
And it is a little weird, him with a guitar is just a little strange, although both of those moments that you mentioned are two of my favorite things in the movies, the stateroom scene with Thelma Todd and out on the rowboat.
It almost seems anachronistic to see Groucho playing the guitar. Yeah. Although it wasn't as anachronistic, it wasn't really, but it seems to anticipate the folk era almost.
Groucho as Dylan.
Too bad Groucho didn't play at Woodstock. That would have been cool. Have the guitar up there.
I was going to bring up, the sequence in Day at the Races, which I call 10 minutes of cheering up Judy, which is they dedicate a lot of musical space to making her happy because she's so dang sad. And which is the song, now I forget the name of it, that Alan Jones sings, Tomorrow's Another Day. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
And then Gabriel Blow Your Horn and All God's Children Got Rhythm, which, you're torn watching it now because obviously there are a lot of racial stereotypes in that which are uncomfortable and unfortunate, but there is something really joyful about Harpo with those kids, and particularly the Gabriel segment, which makes me, wish there were more of Harpo with kids. I love the sequence in Monkey Business at the puppet show where he's with the kids, but I sort of love the whole flow of this, and I love giving those African-American performers an opportunity to show their stuff. Ivy Robertson gets to sing. I think the Dandridge sisters are in there somewhere in the background. And maybe All God's Children Got Rhythm may be the most successful song from a Marx Brothers movie.
It's pretty good, and I think it's been pointed out that it sort of reverses the satirical use of that phrase in Duck Soup with All God's Children Got Guns. Right. So it does seem to be a key moment in the devolution of the Marx Brothers films as vehicles of satire.
My choice for my song is it's actually my favorite song from any Marx Brothers movie. I think perversely it's not a Marx Brothers song. It's Why Am I So Romantic from Animal Crackers, sung by Lillian Roth and the chap with the Art Garfunkel hair. What's his name? Can't think for a minute. Oh, Hal Thompson, I think he's called. And I genuinely think it's one of the best 1930s pop songs ever written. I think it's a beautiful little tune. I think the lyrics are great. I mean, when you hear it in the opening credits of the movie, when you just hear the instrumental version, already it's a classic. It's the most jaunty, delightful little number. And then when it comes in halfway through the movie with these very delightful lyrics, beautifully performed by Lillian Roth, who's a dream obviously to watch with her facial expressions and things. It just gives me a real shot in the arm of happiness.
All the boys I've known used to say I was made of stone. I would always leave them alone in despair. I've been on the pan, I've been called an electric fan, told I'm even much colder than frigid air. I began to wonder if I was all wrong. I thought so till you came along. Tell me, dear, why am I so romantic? When you're near, why am I so romantic? What a grand feeling when your lips meet mine. That's certain something comes stealing up and down my spine. I don't know what it is you do to me. You don't know half of the good you do me. All the boys for me, they just leave me blue. Oh, why am I so romantic with you?
Tell me, dear, why am I so romantic? When you're near, your lips touch mine, that certain something comes stealing up and down my spine.
When we pet, close in your arms you hold me. I forget all that my mother told me.
Other girls for me, they just leave me blue. But why am I so romantic with you?
And I think one thing that is, I think I'm right in saying, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that's unique about it, is I think it's the only Marx Brothers movie where the song that the young lovers sing to each other is by the same writers as the comedy songs. I think that's correct, and that's part of the reason why it's so great. It's written like a Marx Brothers song, written like a comedy song, but it is this most delightful little semi-ironic love duet between two delightful young lovers, and it just is the happiest, loveliest song I know.
Right on. I think it's a great number, and it's as you undoubtedly know, it wasn't in the original stage Animal Crackers, but was introduced specifically for the film. But since then, whenever Animal Crackers is revived on stage, "Why Am I So Romantic" is always interpolated because it's a crucial ingredient in the recipe.
You'll get no argument from me. I love this song. It's totally delightful. And Lillian, the personality she injects into her performance of this song is really great and seems different from sort of the vibe I get from other movies made in 1930. You know, there's something kind of modern about her delivery and her performance.
Yes, there really is. And I think that's part of why she is generally the favorite ingenue. She seems more like she could inhabit the same world as the Marx Brothers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Than, say, Ruth Hall, she's very New York. I think that's part of it. She has a very thick New York accent and she is kind of a wise guy in her own right.
Yeah.
And her character is written a little more sassy and acerbic by Kaufman and Riskind than the typical ingenues are in their films.
Was this song covered much, re-recorded by other people, or was it kind of did it appear here and was forgotten apart from by Marx fans?
I'm looking online right at this moment, and there were a number of covers, but from that era, nothing from beyond the 1930s that I'm seeing.
The reference to Frigidaire in the lyric always strikes me as an especially typical and delightful period touch, putting brand names of then very modern technological marvels into songs. It seems a very Cole Porter move to reference Frigidaire in a love song.
Yes.
A musical thing we didn't really touch on is the way old nostalgic numbers pop up in these incidental contexts in the Marx Brothers films, like Sweet Adeline in Monkey Business and My Old Kentucky Home in Animal Crackers and Down by the Old Mill Stream in Day at the Races. They had this whole other kind of hidden repertoire of ancient songs that they'd heard millions of times in vaudeville that they could just lapse into at any moment in 3, or if you want to fight about it, 4-part harmony. That was a real part of, that was significant in their bag of tricks, just lapsing into real antique numbers.
Yeah, I wonder, I sort of, this probably isn't real, but I can in some ways picture like Chico at the piano and all the Marx family, all the boys gathered around, and Minnie and Sam, like, that was the form of entertainment in those days, the piano that everybody had in the house. That was the radio, that was the TV of its era. So I wonder if there was a lot of that in the Marx household growing up when Chico was home.
Yeah, that's a lovely thing to imagine. Mark's family scene at home with everyone gathered around the piano, raucously singing and
shouting out suggestions for Chico, and hey, play this. Yeah.
We haven't really talked about the music of Coconuts, which I've always thought is underrated. Yeah, it's not the classic score that Irving Berlin was hoping for, but there's some nice tunes, and I love Monkey Doodle Doo. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
Yeah, Monkey Doodle Doo. I can't tell you how much I love it, and although I guess some of the Groucho numbers, are closer to my heart, Monkey Doodle Doo pleases me. The way Matthew's talking about Why Am I So Romantic, it's just great, and even without the delightful and absurd lyric, the melody of Monkey Doodle Doo, it's that really is like we're really into the jazz age, with that kind of syncopation and unexpected rhythmic twists and a lyric that just fits the vocal line like a well-tailored suit. It's also genuinely funny, that song, in a way that makes it feel, even though it's not performed by the Marx Brothers, close to their essential attitude. And in my lecture about the Marx Brothers Broadway career, I do a piece where I recite the lyrics of Monkey Doodle Doo and show them on a screen to really get people to consider them, including the reference to monkey glands, which if you Google that, you'll learn things you never wanted to know.
Yes.
Monkeys upon a tree never are very blue. They never seem to be underfoot, that is true. Not like the ones you see on a march in the zoo. Monkeys upon a tree, do the monkey doodle doo. Oh, among the mangoes where the monkey can go, you can see them do. The little monkey doodle doo. Oh, a little monkey playing on his monkey gives them all the cue to do the monkey doodle doo. Let me take you by the hand over to the jungle band. If you're too old for dancing, get yourself a monkey gland and then let's go. A little weary is the Darwin theory telling me I'm you to do the monkey doodle doo.
So do you get a lot of converts to Monkey Doodle Doo from your lectures?
I don't know if the Marx Brothers fans need a lot of converting.
Right.
That song seems, except among those who just resent the musical numbers no matter what, it seems to be fairly popular.
Well, I was going to say the opposite, actually. From what I've seen, I thought that it was generally a much disliked song by Marx Brothers fans, and like you, I cannot for the life of me think why. I often hear people saying, one of the problems, they have two big problems with Coconuts. One is that the camera doesn't move much, big deal, and the other is these terrible songs. And I think they're wonderful. I enjoy them all. But yeah, Monkey Doodle Doo is a wonderful song, very funny. Monkey glands and the Darwin theory, this lovely idea of Darwin theory. What a lovely way of putting that. It's an absolutely wonderful song. I mean, as you say, some people just don't want songs in those movies that aren't sung by the Marx Brothers. As we know, there are people who don't like Alone. There are people who listen to Alone and think, "Oh, get on with it." But even if you don't want soppy stuff, that's such a bubbly, delightful song.
I think it's an easy target because of its title. So, it's fun to say the title, and I think it's easy to mock just because what a stupid song, Monkey Doodle Doo.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I think if people had a chance to attend Noah's lecture and saw the lyrics up there, they would really appreciate that there's a lot more to it than just a silly title.
Hey, I'm available. Anyone wants to hear my lecture, I can be at your apartment in 10 minutes.
Great.
Well, one of the most distinctive pieces of music we associate with the Marx Brothers is the piece that is sometimes called the Chico motif, and which is often misidentified as Sugar Time or Sugar in the Morning. Set us straight on that, Cinco Paul.
Well, I was going to say that when I first heard the song, and I decided I was going to try to learn all of Chico's solos and figure out how to play like him. I ordered the sheet music to a lot of these Beer Barrel Polka and All I Do Is Dream of You, and pizzicato, and I ordered the sheet music to Sugar Time because I assumed that was the song. And so for most of my Marx Brothers life, I knew it as that. But later I discovered it was this song that Chico had written that has many titles, but I think was originally I'm Daffy Over You, which was years before Sugar Time. So I don't know if there was ever a lawsuit, or there could have been, but...
Yeah, I'm Daffy Over You, I think, was the original, but then virtually the same piece of music was later published, again by Chico, with another lyric. It's called Lucky Little Penny.
Lucky Little Penny, right.
Lucky little penny, found a little penny, it was lucky from the start. Replacing, I think it's Like the Wind That's Blowing, Don't Know Where I'm Going, Waiting Everywhere for You. It seems distinctively Chico Marxish of him, doesn't it, to copyright and publish the same song twice with two different lyrics. And perhaps it just served him right that for the rest of eternity, everyone thinks it's a whole other song anyway. But it pops up, of course, it's showcased in Animal Crackers, but it's significant in the scoring of Horse Feathers and Monkey Business, right?
It's kind of the theme of Monkey Business, isn't it?
Monkey
It's
Business.
played throughout, and it's Harpo's solo. That's all, and I think Chico actually requests it, right?
Play something nice. I tell you what you play. Play. Da-da-da-da-dum, dum, da-da-da-da-dum, dum, da-da-da-da-dum, dum, dum. That's it. Oh, it's so beautiful. That's a magnifico. Oh, I like that.
Maybe that was a way for him to earn some extra bucks, right? To get it on the... I don't know how residuals worked in those days.
Oh, yeah, because he had the publishing. Right. Chico, it wasn't just the Marx Brothers movie. Anytime Chico went to an Andre Segovia concert and he said, hey, play da-da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
It's certainly a distinctive piece of music, and it's impossible to hear it or anything like it without thinking of Chico. And it has this sort of bouncy, merry quality that fits the Paramount films especially.
And it can go on forever.
Yes, if you can't think of the thing.
Yes.
Yeah, what I'd love to know is if Chico heard Sugar in the Morning or Sugar Time and what he thought about it, because it came out, it was a quite a big hit song, wasn't it? And it came out a good chunk of time before he died, and it is ludicrously like his song. I mean, I was talking about this on the in the Facebook group to somebody, and they told me very authoritatively that the plagiarism is determined by the number of notes in sequence or something, and there just aren't enough there for it to qualify. I'm sure that's true, but it seems outrageous to me that da 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 is in insufficient to qualify as plagiarism.
That should be enough.
And we know that he wasn't above the odd spurious lawsuit as a means of making money. He did try and sue Warner Brothers over that movie. And it just seems incredible to me that he didn't think, I might be able to make a buck or two out of this, because it is. I mean, I'm sure it was inadvertent. I very, very much doubt somebody actually heard his tune and thought, let's steal that. But nonetheless, it is an absolute exact transcription, isn't it, of it? I just love to know what he thought when that turned up on his radio.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it was inadvertent. I mean, it's a song that you hear it once, and it sticks in your head. So I feel like it's very possible, they saw Animal Crackers and that song was so. I mean, I don't think intentionally they said, "Oh, we're going to steal that song," but I think it may have just been rolling around in their brains since they saw the movie or something, and then it popped out.
Well, this has just been such a treat, guys, talking to you about the music of the Marx Brothers on our 5th episode. My goodness, we have some real longevity now. We are now the elder statesmen of Marx Brothers podcasting. Particular thanks, of course, to our special guest, Cinco Paul. It's been a damn pleasure, Cinco.
Thanks for having me. I always, whenever I listen to the podcast, I fantasize that I'm there with you. Okay. And so now it actually happened for real. So this has been the best.
Well, that's a lesson for the kids out there. If you dream of being on the Marx Brothers Council podcast, who knows? It could happen.
And we'd love to have you back sometime. So let's find another topic that we all can agree on. Maybe the animated Marx Brothers.
Yeah, or when you devote the podcast to the big store.
Oh, yeah.
I'll be there.
We are going to do that, so don't make a promise you can't keep.
Yeah.
You may be the only person willing to talk about it on record.
Bob.
And especially, as always, thank you to our listeners, to the members of the Marx Brothers Council and the wider world. Thanks so much for listening, for all the positive messages that we've gotten, for all those demanding that the podcast become weekly or daily. Yeah, all you have to do is pay 3 full-time salaries, and we'll never stop podcasting.
Yep, and I'd just like to thank Cinco as well for joining us, and just to say what a pleasure it's been getting to know Cinco ever since I got a fan letter from him, a fan email from him regarding my book. I didn't get very many of those, and to get one out of the blue from such an incredibly well-known person was a delight. And even more so, in fact, was getting another one where he said, remember in that when I first got in touch with you, I said I didn't agree with your take on Duck Soup. Well, I've watched it again, and I'm sort of coming around to your way of thinking. I can't tell you what a delight that was. So I've really enjoyed this. Do come again. Thanks also to particularly to Bob, our editor, because what you're listening to now, believe me, is not what we recorded. A multitude of sins will have been hidden. We've had some technical issues here, so hopefully this will sound as good as it always does. That's it from me. Enjoyed that very much, and we'll see you again soon. No, we won't. We'll speak to you again soon, because this is not television.
Well, that brings us down to the end of another one. But before we go, we leave you with what I think we all agree is the greatest piece of music ever associated with the Marx Brothers.
Or anybody.
Schubert wrote a symphony, too bad he didn't finish it. Gershwin took a chord in G and proceeded to diminish it. I sought a variation on a theme that I thought pretty, and I found my inspiration on the east side of the city. The Combs and the Kellys, the Campbells and Vermicellis all form a part of my tenement symphony. The Combs pianola, the Kellys Victrola, all warm the heart of my tenement symphony. The candles come tumbling down the stairs, doodly-ah, doodly-ah, doodly-ah. Oh, Marie, you'll be late for your date with Izzy. And from this confusion, I dreamed up a grand illusion. It's my tenement symphony in Portland. A kid on the first floor practicing the minuet. The kid on the second floor yelling for the dinner that he didn't get. The guy on the third floor awakened from his slumber by the guy on the fourth floor practicing rumba. Of children will greet your ear. Holly G, gotta stop, there's a cop, hey Chinky!